Hey watch friends, today we're going to be checking out the 5th offering from the British micro brand Loresum, and this is their LS04. This one's going to be coming to Kickstarter in late February of 2024. I'll of course have a link down the video description if you care to check that out. I can tell you, while this may not be one that was readily on your radar, you're going to want to stay tuned to see why I think this is an incredible value and for sure one that you want to check out if you're in the market for a Moonphase. Today we're going to be looking at the prototype. However, if you saw that banner there, they do intend to send me one of the production versions, and I always of course want to be upfront about that. With being a prototype, there are going to be a handful of updates, and I'll talk about those as I go throughout. As always with Aventurine and otherwise, you're going to pick up some glare. I want to play with the light a little bit, but we'll get this in mixed lighting and play around with it. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive straight into this, get a feel for this watch, and I really want to unpack this one as to why I think it's so good. First, for the specs, this comes standard with a 2-year warranty. The case is coming in at 39.5 millimeters, measured from roughly the 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock position. The bezel does step down a fair amount, coming in at 37.4 millimeters right on that outer lip. But as we'll talk about, I think this still has a good amount of presence, so if you have a larger wrist, I wouldn't be scared off. The lugs are a strap change friendly 20 millimeters. The lug-to-lug currently is 46.6 millimeters on my calipers. And I say currently, we'll talk about that later on, because that might be subject to change here. The thickness is incredible at only 11 millimeters, and that is including this very high box edge, and this is actually a double dome box edge sapphire crystal. The thickness without that, according to their specs, which everything else is spot on, is right at 9 millimeters. So as we'll talk about and explore further, this is extremely thin, especially for being an automatic movement. The crystal, as I already indicated, double dome box edge sapphire crystal is very pronounced there. They stated at 2 millimeters, and that's a custom crystal there. That sapphire crystal does actually have dual AR coating, so you have on the inner and outer layer. And as we'll see when we look outside, that does really come into play. It helps a lot with the glare. Certainly with the reflective surface of the Aventurine dial that we'll look at further, you do always get reflectivity there. However, I think this does a remarkable job of keeping up with the glare to keep that legibility available. The movement itself is a Miyota 9015, but what makes this amazing is it actually features a True Moonphase module with this. So that's actually created by Behrens, which is pretty incredible there, especially at the price point that we'll talk about. I'm giving a little bit of a teaser there, but do stay tuned for that part. So this, with being a True Moonphase module, is 29.5 days as far as the actual moon cycle through that, but you get all the goodness that you would have typically with a Miyota 9015. So it's going to be a higher beat, 28,800 beats per hour. You still have hacking, hand winding, all that kind of good stuff. So everything we love about the 9015 with a very reputable module that you have to get you that true moon phase. The water resistance is rather diminutive, coming in at only 50 meters or 5 atmospheres. I think that's plenty sufficient for this dressier style watch. So, it's going to be splash resistant. Certainly wouldn't jump into a pool, which obviously with the factory included leather strap wouldn't do that either. But I think that's perfectly in keeping with this style. Usually I like at least 100 meters. However, with this style, you can absolutely forgive it. They didn't go down to 3 atmospheres, so that's good there. As far as the weight, on this factory strap, it's only coming in at 64.8 grams, so very, very light, and it absolutely, between the thinness and everything else, disappears on the wrist, but we'll explore that further. So now that we have the basic specs, let's go ahead and get to the fun part and really dive in and explore this model. First, for the colors. This is available in 3 different versions standard, though there is a stretch goal as well. There's the stainless steel, which of course has the Aventurine dial that we're looking at today. There's additionally a rose gold, and that's both for the case as well as for the accents. So when you look at those polished accents, that has rose gold as well. And then there's a pretty slick all black version. That unfortunately I believe is a PVD coating as opposed to a DLC on there, which is a form of PVD. So that's not going to be quite as durable, but it's a really cool look, and they black everything out for that. Gives a neat effect there, especially with the Aventurine sparkle. There's also a stretch goal of a mother of pearl version that could potentially be unlocked. That's pretty neat, though I will say I'm personally partial to these Aventurine standard versions. As far as the dials themselves, on the 3 main versions, these are all going to have Aventurine for the dial as well as the sub dial, and we'll look at that here momentarily. Each of these is really going to completely and totally capture that twinkling star effect. If you have yet to experience an Aventurine dial, it is our treat on the wrist. No, it's not for everybody because it does get some of that kind of glittery twinkle kind of effect, but it really captures the effect like the twinkling of a night sky. Certainly, probably more of a concentration than most of us have for stars, but it's such a cool backdrop to have with this moon phase. As far as the moon itself, so that moon is set in on that sub-disk there. So that sub-disk rotates around. There's actually 2 moons, so that way it can pick up whether it's waxing or waning. but that is also going to be an Aventurine disc. They have a mother of pearl, so 2 mother of pearl circles that are actually laid in to that to give you your moon. The reason why they were able to get that shadowing that has is that's actually 3D printed on top of mother of pearl, so it gives it that texture effect. But one of the things that is so striking that's probably going to be hard to pick up or to fully appreciate on camera is you not only get the pearlescence that you would get with a mother of pearl, but that 3D effect on there, not only does it truly give a 3D effect, but it actually gets that shadowing, where just like if you look at the moon where it seems like it's kind of shifting and it pops out and it has the depths of the craters and all that kind of stuff, it achieves that better than I've ever seen on any execution of a moon. Really quite incredible there. Absolutely love that. Around that, you're going to see that this does have a polished frame, which I think really captures that gorgeous silhouette where you have kind of that crescent shape, modified, obviously, crescent shape around there. I think that's just such a beautiful accent and touch, and it really adds some interest beyond just kind of a relatively sterile Aventurine dial like one other that we'll talk about here shortly. As you move further out, you can see that polished frame is again carrying through to the perimeter to set apart that chapter ring. And then as for the chapter ring itself, it has, what is kind of like reminiscent of like a coin edge texture you'd see on a bezel. It's a very tightly patterned ridges that you have going throughout there. And I think it gives a neat visual touch. I really think it adds some interest to it, and especially with that box edge, it gives a cool distortive effect as you move that around. Shifting over to the hardware on this has a customized, skeletonized handset. So that handset has linear brushing, which I think is a good call because it gives a little more light play. So as you move it around, it is so easy for hands to wash out against an Aventurine backdrop, and absolutely this does. That's why they have the loom accent tips here as well. But this is a really cool texture and finish, and it's a neat, it's hard to describe. I guess it's kind of like a blunted sword or spear or what have you kind of shape for that, but it's a very cool effect, and I really like the shape of those hands. They went ahead and actually applied a gunmetal finish to that, which is hard to appreciate depending on how light's hitting it. It can just look kind of stainless steel, but it's a lighter gunmetal, and I think that gives an interesting hue to it, and I like that touch as well. As far as the handset itself, it has, as we'll see here, a neat stacking effect. So as the 2 hands line up, you can actually see that under loom, and it just gets this really cool like double triangle stack in there, so you actually keep legibility even when the hands are stacked on each other, and that's such a cool touch. But additionally, with the skeletonization, you can see that Aventurine peeking through no matter where it's at in position. You can always see that popping through the middle, and I just really think it helps for that immersion and giving you that kind of stark sky effect there of the nighttime sky, which is really, really slick. As far as the second hand, they went with it kind of like a darker blue color. Certainly it does wash out more or less against that dial, because Aventurine, depending on the lighting, sometimes it's more of like a violet or like a deep blue color. Other times it looks a little more black, but that color, as far as the second hand, they were really trying to, I think, kind of lose that against the dial while at the same time keeping legibility where you do have that white accent tip out the end. On the production version, they're going to modify that tip a little bit, so it's going to be a little finer and a little more pronounced for it, and we'll talk about the loom here momentarily. Shifting back out to the chapter ring, you can see that this does have applied indexes all the way around. So you have your 5-minute indexes. Those are just going to be a nice, subtle kind of baton there. They're on the smaller side, but I think fit in well with the overall theming, certainly add plenty for legibility, and they do have nice polished facets to them. The whole things are polished, but the facets do play with the light nicely as well, so that's a good touch. You're going to have single all the way around with the exception of the 6 o'clock where they have their name of the Loresum, as well as the double at the D12, 3, and 9 to kind of give you the cardinal. Those aren't loomed. Which, speaking of the loom, let's go ahead and transition over and take a look at that. As you can see here, the loom on the hands, and that's for all 3 hands, it does okay. I think that for the application here, I believe that they went with a printing as opposed to a filled loom. I definitely would like to see this be kicked up. It's definitely not the strongest performance in the world, but it's okay. Mainly I see this as being a kind of accent for nighttime. Practicality probably isn't going to be there, but during the day, it does really help with legibility because that never washes out as you get reflection against the dial. The coolest effect, though, is that mother of pearl 3D printed moon actually is loom also. So what's really slick there is as you move around with this in the nighttime, or as you have glimmers of light hit that, it just plays and really exacerbates that kind of shadowing effect as you move throughout. It looks incredible daytime or nighttime. Absolutely love that, as I'm sure it's coming across clearly here. Shifting over to the bezel on this is a fixed bezel. As you can see here, as we already talked about, it is set back. It additionally plays with the texture, so you have nicely applied circular brushing or linear brushing, depending on how you want to characterize it on the round there, but it does have nice clean brushing. Then it shifts over to a polish, where it does have a nice slope for that, and as you can see, from the side angle, it gets a really cool stepped effect. With the case itself, you've got a step there, then you get a step with that slope, and then you get a step for the box edge crystal. So that looks pretty slick from the side, and I like that accent touch. Shifting over to the case, as we already looked at, this is extremely thin. This thing is 316L stainless steel. It has gorgeous finishing all the way around. So you can see here, this does have nice linear brushing there. You got polish accents on the top, as well as coming through, peeking with the case underside as well. And then as we look out to the lugs, and we'll touch on those momentarily, that has a circular brushing. So they really played with the texture, a lot of attention to detail in it. Even though this is a prototype, it is so cleanly done. Really, really impressed with that. But this mid case, I mean, look at how impossibly thin that is. I hope it's appreciable on camera as to just how extremely thin this is, and we'll see it on wrist, so you can appreciate that even more. This does have a downturn, which is a nice kind of graceful flowing for the downturn. You can see the lugs do come right back to that case back there, so nicely done. As far as the lugs, as we already saw, it does change up that texture there, which I think, again, adds for nice light play. They do have this where it's a kind of thin, kind of delicate lug cutout, which I think is in keeping with the dressier style. We'll talk about the length, though, as we go on later on, because I'm hoping that's going to be modified. On the 3 o'clock side, you can see that this does not have crown guards, which I think that's a good call and keeps with the overall style. As far as the crown itself, this is coming in at 6.3 millimeters. It does have a traditional coin edge for that, which again, I think is in keeping kind of with that chapter ring ridges that you have as well. In being a dressier style and with 5 atmospheres of water resistance, this, as you might expect, is a push-pull crown for this. It is going to be signed, as you can see here, and it has nice textural play as you look around there as well. So cleanly done, and I like that. Easy to grab a hold of, easy to manipulate, no complaints there. Shifting over to the case back, this one does have a screw-in case back. The texture and finishing is going to be mixing with brush with a nice application of polishing as well. I like the fact that they were judicious with the polish to where it's not going to be completely a fingerprint magnet. In the middle, you have a pretty expansive exhibition window. As you can see, this does have a custom rotor that's there with their logo, as well as kind of the custom etching in there. So really nice touches for this price point that I keep alluding to that we're going to get to here shortly. But that 9015s are always relatively attractive movements for the price, and then of course, great reliability. So no complaints there either. Shifting over to the strap that we're looking at today is a leather strap that's embossed with kind of like an alligator texture. This particular one is 20 millimeters at the lugs that does taper down to 18 millimeters at the buckle. However, on the production version, it's actually going to go from 20 to 16, which I really think was a good call there. I think it will be more fitting with this watch in the overall design. The quality, as many of you know, I don't personally use leather. However, I played around with this, and as best I can tell, it does seem to be excellent quality. Forcing a curve to that, it actually was rather comfortable on wrist, and it just seems to be nicely done from the stitching and everything else. I really can't complain there either. On the production version, they are going to have quick release spring bars. That did not make it over to this prototype. However, that is already planned and already in the works there, and they have those in hand as well. The buckle itself is going to be a custom signed buckle. Again, in keeping with the strap reduction, it's going to go from 18 millimeters down to 16 millimeters, but that is a mix of brush as well as polish, and it does have their logo etched into that also. As far as the overall thinness of this watch, as I alluded to, and as you can see here from the wrist footage, this completely and totally just tucks into the wrist, and it just wears so nicely. It causes it to absolutely disappear on the wrist. Between the weight and the thinness, until you look down and just see how absolutely beautiful it is, you forget that you're even wearing it half the time. So that's really excellent. All right, now that we have all that out of the way, let's go ahead and shift over and bring in some comps and get an idea as to how this stacks up sizing-wise and everything else. So first, naturally, I want to bring in, this is my Zelos Nova, and this is, of course, the Aventurine there as well. You can see this one does definitely have more presence coming in at almost 40 millimeters, 39.5 millimeters, whereas this one, I believe, is 38 millimeters, so you can see it does show in the presence. While I absolutely love this Nova, this thing, I mean, it holds its own. It's gorgeous, too, with that moon accent, just a very different look and execution for those, but that gives you an idea there of size sizing. And let's check this out. Despite the fact that this Zelos is extremely thin as well, this is a manual one in ETA 7001, whereas this is an automatic, and you can see it is not that much thicker for this. So that's pretty incredible there as well that they were able to do this. And this has an even higher box edge crystal, and that's again including that crystal. So really cool there. Shifting over next, this is another one. They did have this available in an Aventurine as well, but I've got the Meteorite here. This is the Celton Series 00. This one, while it does have moons and a cool accent touch with the dual Meteorite moons there, you can see that this one is a day-night indicator as opposed to an actual moon phase. But I thought these were cool to check out next to each other. Gives you an idea of kind of the sizing and scale there. And then next up, this is one of my favorite brands and one of my favorite models. This is the Lorenzo Mondial, and you can see the DRZ04, how that stacks up next to it. Gives you an idea there as far as sizing. This one's 40, and you can see I think this compares well against it. So it wears relatively around, what you'd expect for a 40. Another very thin watch, and you can see again, this holds its own even with that box edge crystal. But if you look at that case in the bezel, it's even thinner there, it looks like, which is really slick, and that's an impressive feat because that Lorenzo wears so thinly. So the reason why I wanted to bring in this Citizen, this one actually, one of the things that I'm going to talk about here is I do wish that they would make a bracelet option for it. And one of the things that I had as far as a suggestion or an idea was something similar to this Citizen. I think, this pairs relatively well with this, but let me know what you think. Drop a comment. Would you like to see them add a bracelet option? Do you think this style works? Do you have another suggestion for them? Let them know, because they are looking for feedback on that as to whether to add a bracelet option or not. So that's something I would personally like to see happen, but drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Here's a better look at that one. And then finally, I don't have one here, but I did want to do a comparison to what I know many of you are going to compare this against, and that is the Christopher Ward Moonphase that just recently came out. So first, I want to address the elephant in the room. This is not a knockoff of that Christopher Ward. In fact, actually, this one was previewed on the League of Watch Microbrands and otherwise before the Christopher Ward was even announced publicly, or that I had ever seen it, or I think anyone else had outside of their company. So this one, as far as just the timing and otherwise, do know this is not a knockoff of that, despite the obvious similarities. But there's a lot of differences in things that I, in fact, actually like better with this one than the Christopher Ward beyond the price, which I've got to say, let's stop gilding the lily there and just get to the price. This one's going to be launching at only $615 US. That's converted, so that's going to be approximate, but $600 for a true moon phase from Behrens, 9015, all this nice finishing, Aventurine, mother of pearl, all that kind of good stuff. I think that's incredible. That Christopher Ward is almost 4 times the price, coming in at like 23 and change without the bracelet. But additionally, though, as far as style, you can see this one has that polished framing, which I prefer. I think it's a little too sterile on the Christopher Ward, and certainly I'm sure some are going to prefer that, but I like this better personally. Additionally, size-wise, this one's 39.5, whereas that one I believe is 40.5. Fits my wrist a little better, and I think it's a little more versatile in keeping with the dressy style, so I prefer that. Thickness, this is much thinner than the stated spec on that Christopher Ward. I think like 2 millimeters thinner, so that's excellent there as well. And then the movement. Many people might like the bespoke or in-house movement that you're getting from Christopher Ward. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the 9015s, and I like the fact that that can be serviced anywhere. Yeah, you're adding a Behrens, which is a very reputable brand, module to this, so certainly you might not have quite as much reliability, but with a 2-year warranty and a reputable brand, I'll take this 9015 personally. I know not everyone will agree, but especially with the price differential this comes with, so I think this stacks up quite well against that Christopher Ward, in my opinion. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and wrap things up with my personal view of the positives, critiques, as well as the overall summary. First, for the positives, as I'm sure has been clear, I love this watch. This theming, I think, is absolutely perfect. This starry night sky with the twinkle effect that you get for a moon phase, where you've got that bold, vibrant, large mother of pearl moon. That mother of pearl with the 3D printing, that achieves a shadowing, a overall depth unlike any that I've ever seen, and set against that twinkling star effect that you get with that Aventurine. There's nothing else like it, in my opinion, and I think it looks incredible. The moon itself is absolutely breathtaking, as is the dial. Great. The value, as I've already talked about since the get-go and alluded to throughout and just discussed, $615. I think it is an incredible value. I think you are getting so much watch for your money, and for people who have been eyeing up or wanted to have a true moon phase but couldn't afford one in the past, I think this is your opportunity. This thing is fantastic. Quality, you will not be disappointed. Which, speaking of the quality, even though this is a prototype, the fit and finish is excellent. The brushing is clean, the polishing is clean, the dial is absolutely gorgeous. The mother of pearl, like I've already talked about, I don't think I've ever seen a better execution of a moon. Is everything perfect? No, and we'll talk about that here in the critiques, but it's really darn good. And then the thinness, this thing is impossibly thin for an automatic, especially with having that super high box edge double dome crystal there. So that is including all of that, and it still is ridiculously thin, and I think you'll love that on wrist. But as far as some of the critiques, we already talked about the loom. The loom strength on this is, it's weak. I mean, it works. I like the accent as far as with the moon, but it's definitely something that if you're looking for loom, this is one of those things, almost think of it like being a non-loom watch in my experience. Yeah, I mean, it's better than not having it at all, but it's going to be disappointing if you are looking for a strong loom execution. So I do hope they go over to like a filled or otherwise are able to kick that up. I'd like to see that on the production version, but otherwise, I mean, it's fine. I really don't even think this needs loom, so take it for what it is. The lug length, as we've already talked about, so as you can see here, there's a pretty pronounced gap between the strap as well as the case. I don't like that. Definitely want to see this kicked in. But ideally, I would actually like to see, even though this already has a relatively short lug to lug at 46.6, I'd like to see them shave this down. And that's already including it's got that edge there. I would like to see them shave off maybe like a millimeter or so, get this tucked in closer. I think you've got plenty of wiggle room that even with a thicker strap, you still have plenty of clearance, because I don't want to make it too limiting for you all who want to go with a different strap, including myself. But that being said, I think they've got plenty of wiggle room, and I just don't like the gap that's there. That's something they're already intending to address for that. I'm not sure about the lug length, but they're definitely going to move this closer to the case one way or the other, whether they shorten the lugs or not. So do be aware of that. The glare, as we already talked about, moving around, let's intentionally get this. Even with trying to pronouncedly get glare on it, you can see for being an Aventurine watch, it really isn't too bad. And same thing for the double dome. So I think it does a good job, but that's always going to be there. So just be aware of that. And especially it does actually cause the hands to wash out. But with that loom, you don't have any issues there for legibility. And then finally, as we already talked about, I'd love to see a bracelet option. So I'm hoping that they can make that happen. Drop a comment, please. Help me to give them feedback and to hopefully get that one to be realized for all of those who want a bracelet. But let me know what style you think would work well. So in wrapping things up, where does that leave us? As you can tell throughout, this thing's fantastic. Dollar for dollar, I can't think of another Moonphase that I would pick over this one. It is really incredible. One, it's hard to find another Moonphase at $600, a true Moonphase, but even putting that aside, I really just think stylistically, they nailed it in almost all regards. It really is quite good. And the value across the board, as I already said, this really opens the market for people who have been looking for a Moonphase that want a quality watch without breaking the bank. So there you have it. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you did like it, as always, tap that like button. If you haven't already done so, smash that subscribe button, and then drop me a comment, talk about the bracelet, talk about which of these versions you like, what would you like to see different, all that kind of good stuff. Thanks for watching.